This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Speers.
Huge floods in the north of New South Wales this week. We'll get you across why they say they're a once-in-500-year event.
The breakup of the coalition and moves to patch it up by the end of the week, that takes a bit of explaining. We'll also check out US President Donald Trump's claims of genocide in South Africa.
And we'll get you across which of the two beef weeks are on next week. Let's do it.
Let's go.
This show is brought to you by HubSpot. Their AI-powered platform is helping you accomplish more than ever before. And their Breeze AI agents handle all the busy work so you can focus on growing your business. Kicking off with the most clicked link in the Squiz Today newsletter this week, and I couldn't be more proud of the result. It was our 2025 Squiz survey.
How good are Squizzes at just getting involved in these things? I started filling mine out and then I thought, I don't know if you actually want my thoughts. They're probably a bit biased, but you've got them anyway.
Yes, I'm assuming that you gave Weekly Wrap a glowing review.
Of course.
It's not about actually glowing reviews. It's a really big survey. It's packed with questions about how you squiz. We're particularly keen to understand your feedback on things like News Club and how we're doing Weekly Wrap. So, look, my ever so slightly desperate plea is please go and fill out the survey. We really like podcast listeners to do that. We get heaps and heaps of newsletter subscribers doing the survey. It's very easy for them. You just click on a link in the newsletter and away you go. So we do appreciate that it takes our podcast listeners a little bit more effort to do that. So we would appreciate it.
But we will make it the first item in the notes for this morning. Essentially, if this episode is up on your podcasting app, you'll see some text that's under the play button, whether you're on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform, and there will be a link there that you can click on that will take you to the survey.
Jodie, we had a bit of back and forth about what we would lead with this week. The breakdown of the federal coalition has really been quite something, and we'll get into that next. It was hard not to start with the flooding in New South Wales because they're pulling out that word again, which is unprecedented.
Yeah, almost 50,000 people have been left isolated. Hundreds more have been rescued, including by chopper. There were actually 10 choppers in operation, taking people off their roofs as that water rose rapidly in many areas. Awful conditions for those in the choppers as well, so kudos to them. The Pacific Highway was cut. There were cases of truckies who were stranded for a couple of days. My friend Kate is stuck in Port Macquarie, can't get back to Sydney. It's affecting lots of people, and it's been described as a once-in-500-year flooding event.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment about what that means because it does require a bit of explanation. The bulk of the rescues were in Taree, Wingham and Glenthorne, including several people in cars who had been stuck driving into floodwaters. As we're recording, the authorities have confirmed that 3 people have died in that region. There's another person who is missing. It's an area that's not unfamiliar with flooding.
No, it's not. I've been to these areas a few times as a news reporter before, particularly Port Macquarie, Kempsey, in the sort of northern part of where this flooding is affecting people. Like Lismore in 2021, this region saw bad floods at that time. This time around, the rainfall records have been broken. Taree's seen 500 millimetres and that town is mostly underwater. Other parts of the region got hit with 600 mils. If those numbers don't really mean much to you, then that is half of Sydney's average annual rainfall within the space of a few days, or almost all of Melbourne and Perth's average annual rainfall. It's a huge amount.
It's a lot of rain. The meteorologists say that there are particular conditions that have led to this. They've called out these warmer than usual ocean temperatures. What that means is that more moisture evaporates into the atmosphere, and when you add weather systems that led to this very stationary trough, they call it. It didn't move. It just put rain over that region for days.
The other factor that's exacerbating things is that these areas have already seen a lot of rain this year. So when you've got sodden ground and so much rain comes in, it just doesn't end well.
Yeah, there's nowhere for that water to go but to flood. That's the watch out as the weather system gets a bit of a move on too. It's heading south. There are areas as you head towards Sydney that are sodden as well from previous rainfall. I was just seeing reports that Sydney's dams are full, so there's of course concerns that there'll be spillage over those dam walls and into those rivers that can flood really big areas.
Hawkesbury, yeah,
all of that again. So we're looking at that. There's a lot of anxiety, of course, when it comes to these sorts of events. Lots of stories from that region this week of farmers who lost stock in the recent floods, and they will this time as well. And it's just too hard, they say, for them.
Yeah, the mental health toll is huge. And that's at the core of some of these difficult discussions that are taking place on how we navigate these sorts of extreme weather events going forward, because they're only going to happen more with climate change.
Yeah, that's what they say. Really interesting to see this week what the Insurance Council was saying. They were doing a lot of work, even from the start of the week, to determine how many people and businesses are in these flood-hit towns and how many of them have insurance. What the council says is their data shows that in many of these high-risk areas, only 1 in 4 actually have enough coverage to get them through these events.
Yeah, I've definitely found that on the ground as a reporter in these zones, talking to people who had water all the way through their houses in low-lying areas really close to the river, and you'd ask if they were insured and they'd say no, they just can't afford it.
Yeah, just incredible. Premiums, of course, are more expensive than they've ever been in these high-risk areas, and it's raised questions about what flood protections council can provide. One report I read this week said that Taree's council had recently, like in the last few months, looked at building a levee to protect the town. It sits on a bend of the Manning River, so again, floods happen very regularly. That plan has been put on hold because of the cost.
Yeah, a huge amount involved. We can expect more discussion, I think, on what governments and councils can do because, as we said, these things are happening more and more frequently, which brings us to this flood being described as a once-in-500-year event. I wondered how they calculate that.
Look, it's not news hyperbole either. It's actually a thing. It's designated by this body called Natural Hazards Research Australia. Essentially, it means that what's happened is extreme and highly unlikely based on the long-term data that they have.
And they make that assessment even though they only have records that go back about 100 years, not 500. I think the way that Andrew King, who's an associate professor in climate science at the University of Melbourne, put it makes a lot of sense. He says another way to think about it is that floods like this have a 1 in 500 probability of ever occurring.
So when you put that into a percentage, it's 0.2% likelihood. So very, very unlucky, but it feels like we're seeing these events more and more. So that is the big question, is it doesn't mean that there's not another chance of this happening in the next few years, let alone the next 500 years.
Takes me back to my probability classes in high school maths. My brain starts to struggle. We will leave that there, but if you're in that zone or the areas that are being hammered by rain, then we're thinking of you and please stay safe. Stay out of those floodwaters.
Absolutely. In the age of AI, you need business software that's easy to use and actually delivers results fast. That's what makes HubSpot's approach to AI so refreshing. Do more with less stress, thanks to Breeze, their suite of AI tools. Breeze agents handle busy work for you, creating marketing content and finding sales leads and handling customer service questions. And Breeze Copilot gives you the right info at the right time so you can always stay 2 steps ahead. Customers are selling faster and saving hours on work every week. Visit HubSpot.com/AI to get started today. Three other stories from across the week. There was plenty to choose from this week. Hard to go past the coalition's post-election troubles, which seem to go from bad to worse.
Holy moly, this really took me by surprise earlier in the week. We talked a bit last week about the coalition agreement and some of the strains between the Libs and the Nats, but I really didn't see it getting to this. It's only happened 3 times before in history. I think the last time they split up I was in preschool, so I don't have much of a sort of benchmark for it.
You don't remember it? You don't recall it?
I don't recall. I wasn't quite as politically astute at 3 or 4 or whatever I was. Let's just go through what happened here and what was at the crux of the breakup.
Yeah, and I guess a good place to start is what is the coalition agreement. It's a secret pact. It's not something that's published on a website. You won't go to the Nationals or the Liberals website and actually find it. It's a secret document.
And it's flexible, is it? It's not set in stone.
No, so essentially what happens is after an election or when there's a change in the leaders, they renegotiate the agreement. So that's why we're here now. It's come after, of course, a very tumultuous time and they need to reset. So usually the focus, though, of the document is this sort of carve up of the positions. There's, of course, when you're the opposition, you get shadow ministries. By the way, along with that comes money. So if you're a front bencher, you get a bit more in your salary. You also get additional staff. So there's quite a bit up for grabs. And that's usually the focus. But this time, it was really centred on this policy question that the Nats wanted some clarity on.
Yeah, so the Nats had 4 key demands, it seemed, when it came to policy. On Little Proud's list to discuss was this guarantee that the coalition would commit to lifting the national ban on nuclear energy to start with, laws to forcibly divest the supermarket giants. He wanted the establishment of a $20 billion regional future fund and also some assurance that telcos would provide proper phone and internet services to the bush.
Not necessarily big deals in and of themselves, but the issue is that Susan Lee, as leader of the Liberal Party, she accepted that job last week and she said that all of the Liberal Party's policies are under review. So she isn't in the position to be able to agree to any commitment to those policies. The other issue is that the Nationals asked that they not be bound by cabinet solidarity. So they wanted the right to go behind closed doors, have those sorts of conversations about policy, and then come out and say, we actually disagree on all of these things, and that's an issue for team solidarity going forward.
Yeah, that's not something that's usually agreed to, is it?
No, not at all.
We also need to keep in mind that Susan Lee had a lot going on. It's only last week that she was actually locked in as leader, and at the same time she had her mum receiving palliative care and she only passed away in the last week. So she's had funeral plans to deal with, family issues, not to mention her own party and then these discussion with the Nats.
It's a lot, that's for sure. And just to note too, Lee and Little Proud have some history together. So when you look at 2019 to 2022, Susan Lee was the Environment Minister. David Littleproud, as now leader of the Nats, he was also the Agriculture Minister in those days. So those two portfolios have quite a bit of tension against each other. There's some conflicting stakeholders there to manage. So they did come up against each other when they were in the Morrison government days. Also, just note that Lee actually won a seat off the National Party when she first entered Parliament back in 2001. So that was the time when Tim Fischer retired from politics in the seat of Farrer. So what happened was Lee, it was open to the Liberals to run a candidate and she ran for the Liberals. The Nationals, of course, put a candidate up, but she beat them. So there's been this sort of long-standing tension that the seat that she's in should be a National Party seat.
Yeah, and the public isn't necessarily aware of a lot of these things bubbling away in the background. We had all sorts of commentary this week, including from John Howard, who doesn't come out very often. He labelled this breakup as stupid.
It was pretty clear how he felt about it.
He doesn't mince his words, John. And apparently some of the Nats also started sort of getting cold feet about this decision. And so the pressure was really on. And by Thursday, they had somewhat patched things up.
somewhat patch things up, we think. We'll have to see exactly where they land. If it comes to a question, if you've got in your mind, like, why is this such a problem? The issue is that the longer you stay apart, the harder it is to come back together. So they want to get that problem. Certainly John Howard and others talked about that a lot this week. You don't want those problems to fester. And the longer you stay apart, the more you're going to say about each other. That's not particularly nice. The other issue, of course, is neither party can win government in their own right. And that's the main aim. That's why they're there, is to try and win government.
Yeah, so this isn't just relevant for these two parties and, the internal fighting. This matters for us because this is, it's meant to be a viable alternative to the government that's in. Do you reckon that they can patch this up in time, though, for people to forget about it before the next election? Is it going to be relevant then?
Oh, look, a lot of water will probably go under the bridge. There's a lot of things to do. But you can just hear Anthony Albanese and various others in the government and on the Labor side bringing this up at every single opportunity about how disunited the coalition, if they do get back together, are. So expect it to continue to be a major one.
Yeah, given them so much ammunition.
Moving on, we've spent lots of time recently talking about President Donald Trump's dealings with various countries, particularly Russia, China, Ukraine, Canada. There's been a few for him to get around. But South Africa hasn't really been much of a feature until this week. Trump raised some pretty startling claims of genocide, particularly the genocide of white farmers in South Africa. We thought that this would be a good one to pick up on this week because it does require a bit of conversation.
It does, yeah. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was visiting the US this week and he was involved in another one of these quite awkward, chaotic meetings in the Oval Office that we saw with the Ukrainian leader recently. This time, Trump claimed that white Afrikaners were being systematically murdered in South Africa and having their land ripped away from them by the government.
Yeah, he says the persecution is so bad that America is now being inundated with white farmers trying to flee that situation. He also brought Australia into it, saying that we've also seen an influx of these people coming to Australia to flee the violence there. He insisted in that meeting in the Oval Office of playing this video to the South African president. If you haven't seen the footage, it really is quite something. The dimming of the lights, the forcing of the TV to turn on to sit awkwardly and watch this video. Commentators there described that as a complete ambush.
Yeah, it was a video which spliced together clips of a couple of South African politicians, leaders of opposition parties. One of them says we are going to occupy land and we must not be scared to kill. Another one sings we are going to shoot them, they are going to run. And Elon Musk actually reshared this video on X back in March.
Yeah, Elon Musk, of course, comes into this conversation. He was born in South Africa and this issue has popped up on his social media platform X quite a bit in recent months. There is a precedent for this sort of anti-white violence in that part of Africa. It made me think of Robert Mugabe's government in Zimbabwe. Of course, when you look at the 80s, around that time and even later, there were people who had their farms taken from them. Many were killed. Some did get out. Cyril Ramaphosa denies that that sort of situation is happening in South Africa.
Yeah, the crime rate is high in South Africa, as a lot of people would know. He admits that, but he says that most of those who were killed are actually black people, and there's no evidence of white farmers in particular being targeted. There were some interesting stats in the Guardian newspaper that I clocked this week. Out of 7,000 murders in South Africa in the last quarter of 2024, 12 took place on farms, and not all the victims in those cases were white.
Donald Trump is convinced that there is a problem, though, and it's clearly been on his mind for many, many months. He signed an executive order back in February, so not long after he retook the presidency, and it cut aid to South Africa. He accused South Africa of unjust racial discrimination, and that order also set up a program for Afrikaners to head to the United States as refugees refugees.
Yeah, and the first group arrived earlier this month. On to some more lighthearted and hopefully unifying news, Claire. The vision for the Brisbane Olympics in 2032 is starting to take shape.
Yeah, a big delegation this week coming to Brisbane. So all of the big bosses of the International Olympic Committee were there. They gave them the tick, saying they seem to be pretty organised, which is good. They did a tour of some of the sites too where these major venues are going to be built. We've talked quite a bit on Weekly Wrap about all of the issues that have played out in elections all through the last couple of years or so about picking how they're going to do it, whether they need new venues or whether the dinky little Commonwealth Games
can be given a lick of paint
where Matilda the kangaroo did a lap is going to be fine. But there is going to be a new big 63,000 seat stadium that's going to be built at Victoria Park. They went for a bit of a look-see there.
Yeah, and we learnt that construction could start on that as soon as next year, although the plans don't seem to be finalised yet. The Queensland government is proposing some new laws which would allow the Games organisers to override a bunch of the local planning laws, the usual red tape that you encounter for big construction projects, like the Heritage Act and the Environmental Protection Act. It's all in order to fast-track this and get the venues done in time.
Yeah, another big challenge that they're talking about quite a bit at the moment is how on earth did they get enough workers to actually build these things? Anyone who's tried to do a renovation or build a home in anywhere, it seems, across Australia, finding enough people to actually do it is really, really tricky. Tens of thousands more construction workers are going to be needed in Brisbane to actually do this. They will need places to live as well. The Games president has described that as a bit of a concern. He's worried about that.
So just 7 years to go until we get to live all this on home soil. I have something to tide you over in the meantime though, Claire. The Enhanced Games were officially launched in Vegas this week, and they will take place there next year. This is the event where athletes are allowed to take a lot of the performance-enhancing drugs that they're usually told to stay away from.
More than allowed, they're sort of encouraged. It seems to be a compulsory part of this. Did you see the pictures of James Magnussen
I
this week?
hardly recognised him. I did see them, and he's huge. I think he said he's put on about 20 kilos, and it must just be pure muscle.
The photos were just extraordinary. Just incredible. He, of course, is an Aussie swimmer who did very well across Olympic Games, but he's one of the first recruits to this Enhanced Games. They're starting to get people on board. What happened in the news this week is that they've announced the dates and they've announced the sports about what's going to happen in Las Vegas. I saw Magnussen being interviewed about it as part of that launch by Matt Shervington on Sunrise, of course, a former Olympian as well. Magnussen was really uncomfortable, I think, talking about the sort of drug regime that he's under. He says that he's experimenting with quite a few substances, including testosterone. So there's a medical team that's overseeing that, but lots of concern about what that actually could do.
I find it quite hard to shake off the feeling that we're watching this real-life science experiment play out in front of us. It's quite bizarre. Yeah. As for who's behind it, one of the key supporters is a group called 1789 Equity, backed in part by Donald Trump Jr. Athletes will compete for up to $500,000 per event, and bonuses start at $250,000 for those who break records.
It's a lot of money in that world. Athletes don't get access to that sort of cash from competition, so it's definitely going to be a draw card for some. Some big money, some big names behind it, a few moral questions about exactly how that's all going to play out and what sort of message it sends kids as well.
I'm not sure I'd want my kids watching.
Yeah, and that's the question. It'll be fascinating to see what sports fans make of it. Jodie, Beef Week kicks off in Casino in northern New South Wales today. They're actually north of all the flooding, so there's no issues with the rainfall there. Last year, there's a bit of baggage we're carrying into this one, so I'm sorry to laden you with this. We forgot to put Beef Week in what's coming up, and Kate really felt like we had let people down.
I had to go and Google this because we know that it's important to some squizzes and we want to make sure we get it right. Turns out that Rockhampton and Casino both hold Beef Weeks, but they're two separate events. Rockhampton hosts Beef Australia every 3 years, and then Casino's event is annual. That's the one we're talking about.
Yeah, and it was the Rockhampton one last year. It's not on until 2027, so we're in the clear with Rockhampton Beef Week for a little
Kate will
while.
be back by then.
Take that pressure off. When we get into this weekend, heading into Sunday night, Formula One in Monaco is on. It's a huge race for Aussie Oscar Piastri. He's at the top of the table when it comes to the driving championship. So another win for him would be excellent.
That race is on at 11 p.m. Sunday night Eastern Time. Monaco or Monaco?
Monaco.
Monaco.
Must be Monaco.
I think people say it, but it's like tomato.
Yeah.
On Sunday, it's the Australian Real Estate Conference on the Gold Coast. Not something I would usually have on my calendar, but former US Vice President Kamala Harris is speaking.
Kamala is there. She's not dialing in virtually. She's actually going to be on the Goldie. Ariane Titmus, Emma McKeon, Stephen Bartlett, who has the podcast Diary of a CEO, they're in the lineup as well. It's a seriously stacked speakers list.
Who'd have thought? In the past, they've had Reese Witherspoon and Ryan Reynolds as well. What any of them have to do with real estate on the Goldie, I have no idea, but clearly they are not cutting corners on the speakers budget.
They really are not. That conference continues into Monday. The French Open also kicks off at the start of the week. There's at least 13 Aussies playing there, including the men's world number 7, Alex de Minaur.
The Demonator. Monday's also National Sorry Day. It commemorates survivors of the stolen generations. And Tuesday marks the start of National Reconciliation Week. The theme this year is Bridging Now to Next. Also on Tuesday, the final ever episode of The Handmaid's Tale will be broadcast.
I think you and I are the only two people in our orbits that haven't watched The Handmaid's Tale.
I intend to get to it, but I haven't yet.
Yeah, it's on my list as well. It's very, very good timing for us, though, because our next episode of The Call Sheet is with Dana Reid. She's the Australian director who worked on this series.
An incredibly successful director. She's also directed Run Rabbit Run, The Secret River, the movie based on the Kate Grenville novel that's really popular, Offspring, which is huge, and Paper Giants.
Lots of shows in there and movies that I've seen that I really enjoy. So, we have a good chat to her. That's one to line up for Wednesday next week when the next interview comes out on News Club.
Changing gears slightly dramatically, on Wednesday night it is game 1 of the men's State of Origin. My 10-year-old will be very excited.
He dresses in blue.
Oh, he's been asking me, when's State of Origin on?
State of Origin. It's on in Brisbane and you can watch that on Channel 9. As we get to the back end of the week, the final decision on Woodside's Northwest Shelf gas project. It's off the coast of Western Australia. There's a decision pending about whether it's going to remain operational past 2030. That's expected at the end of the week.
Yeah, that will come from the Federal Environment Minister Murray Watt. Woodside's request is to extend the life by another 40 years. It's a huge project and lots of jobs obviously tied up with that.
Yeah, expect that to be in the news, so put that on your radar. It's been under consideration for a really long time as well, so it's one of those decisions that plenty of people are waiting for the answer on.
To wrap things up, Claire, Friday the Matildas play Argentina in Melbourne. And a quick mention here, because one of the biggest news stories this week was English football team Tottenham Hotspurs winning the Europa League final on Thursday, and they are coached by Ange Postecoglou, an Aussie.
An Aussie, so he's a former Socceroos coach. If you're not a soccer fan, it's very hard to, state how important this is to people who follow this very, very closely. He's had a really tricky season when it comes to their regular sort of competition. And he could even be sacked in the next sort of week or two.
Which is crazy to think. Surely not now.
Yeah, just when they've won this really massive European trophy. So a huge thing for an Australian coach to win that. But also for that team, it's broken a bit of a drought for them when it comes to these really big trophies. So, it's massive in that world.
Yeah, made me very proud. In the press conference after the game, he said, to quote my favourite Aussie Prime Minister Paul Keating, after an unlikely victory, this is one for the true believers.
For the True believers. Is that your favourite Aussie Prime Minister or is that Ange's?
I was like, oh, that took me by surprise.
Exactly, Ange's, just to be clear.
Yeah.
We won't out you on who your favourite Australian Prime Minister is. Lots of people saying, even in that, like it's a huge platform when you're talking about those competitions. You can take the boy out of South Melbourne. You can't take South Melbourne out of the boy.
Absolutely not.
Recommendations this week are a Paramount Plus show that I've only just started watching. It's, again, a few years old, like my recommendation last week, is called Couples Therapy. It was very timely because I thought I could have been very handy in the coalition breakdown.
They probably need to rehire you, Claire, in that capacity. I am recommending a book this week. It's called Lonely Mouth, and it's the second novel by Jacqueline Maley, who is a writer for the Sydney Morning Herald. She usually writes about politics. I've spent a bit of time with her in the press gallery in Canberra, but she also writes a cracking novel. And oftentimes you don't get people overlapping on those two talents.
They're very, very different skills to be able to write a novel and also be a really excellent political journalist, which she is. That's quite a talent. What's it about, very quickly?
I'm about halfway through. It's about two sisters and their family history. They were abandoned by their mother when they were young, and it's now kind of following them as adults.
Nice. That sounds good.
It's really well written.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it.
Good one. They're your recommendations. When we get to Squiz Press, our recommendation is to really look at Newshounds again. We've plugged the survey, so now we're plugging ourselves again with
Going
Newshounds.
hard today.
A really big development for us this week. So ACARA, which is the National Curriculum Authority, they've added media literacy to the national schools curriculum, and they've named Newshounds, which is our Squiz Kids media literacy resource, as one of the very, very small number of resources that they refer classrooms to help fill that bit of the curriculum. So a really, really big, important week for us at Squiz Kids.
Yeah, so this means that kids from kindy to year 10 would now be taught how to spot misinformation and disinformation online. I think a lot of adults could do with this sort of lesson as well.
Sure. We're starting with primary school kids, so we'll
Get 'em young.
We'll get through that. We're talking to many, many people, including a Squiz Kids episode that came out with Stephen Gneil, who is the ACARA, so the Curriculum Authority CEO. He had rave reviews for Squiz Kids and for Newshounds, which was really excellent. So I reckon that's a really good bit of Squiz Press for us this week.
It sure is. My kids give it a big tick. You'd be pleased to know.
Amazing. I think that's it for us this week, other than go and do the survey. That would be really handy.
Yes, please. And there's even a prize, I noticed, and a charity donation.
We're pulling out all the stops.
Don't think your contribution won't make a difference.
Have a good weekend. We'll catch you next week.
See you then.
A huge thanks to HubSpot for supporting today's episode. With their AI-powered customer platform, your marketing, sales and service teams can move faster, accomplish more and stress less.